everybody's ready for a fun, engaging discussion. As has already been mentioned, I'm Kathleen Hunter. I'm the founder and CEO of Diversity Hunter International, a corporation that's based in Toronto. We also have an office in Berkeley Square in London. We work with leaders across financial services, professional services, emerging tech and big tech companies to help them to clarify their corporate purpose and align their ESG metrics with their broader strategic business objectives. So for those of you who don't know what ESG is, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So the social metrics are really where diversity and inclusion mainly lies. Also within governance, if you think about representation on corporate boards. So since completing my PhD in skills shortages in science and tech, I've worked in the diversity, inclusion, equity space. It's a real thrill for me to be here with these three experts who bring a lot of insight, I think, and nuanced perspective on diversity and inclusion across a broad range of industries, but all of which fall under the ever-expanding, ever-changing tech umbrella. So next to me, we have Thomas Seymour, Senior Director of HR with mthree, a division of Wiley Education Services. And to his left, we have Liz Scott, Client Engagement Director at TechNation, where she's responsible for driving customer growth through providing meaningful support of a national network of digital tech entrepreneurs and their partners. And to her left, we have Zara Nanu, CEO at Gapsquare, an award-winning organization offering employees intuitive pay and people analytics and services for tackling the pay gaps across dimensions, including gender and ethnicity. So, I'm not sure about you, but I'm looking forward to a dynamic discussion on diversity and inclusion. So let's get started. I think it's actually useful because it's inevitable in most audiences, both online and in person, that there's quite a diversity of understanding in terms of what we are talking about when it comes to some terms that have become much more commonplace, both in popular consciousness as well as the business sphere generally, also tech more specifically. So I'd like to ask our panelists, what exactly are we talking about when we mention diversity and inclusion, and how is that understood within your organization? So Zara, maybe I'll begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question for me because I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company where we've been growing a very diverse organization, specifically looking at how we help bigger businesses address issues around diversity and inclusion through looking at pay. The reason we went about pay is because pay is tangible and pay tells a story. It tells a story of diversity and inclusion within that organization. So when you start comparing pay, for instance, across gender or across ethnicity and race or across disability or any other employee characteristics, you start seeing where inequalities are in a more tangible way. So it stops becoming a kind of a diversity and inclusion issue that gets siloed alongside the HR department or alongside the leadership team and becomes part of reward and compensation, part of pay, and it exposes issues around diversity and inclusion in occupational segregation, meaning that there's more men doing certain types of occupations and more women doing other types of occupation. And in the world of tech, it means more men doing tech-related jobs. In a previous panel, someone mentioned the World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs that was released in November 2020. And not only does that report highlight a lot of new roles and occupations that are coming up within the next 5 years, but also how gendered they are. So if you look at the 20 jobs that are on the increase in the next 5 years, about 90% of them are male-dominated currently in the current context of the UK economy. And if you look at the 20 jobs that are on the decline in the next 5 years, around 70% of them are female-dominated. So that, in looking at diversity and inclusion, I think the angle that I'm trying to bring is that kind of economic angle and how we can create more participation in the economy in the future, because at the current pace, it's looking like the pay gap is only going to increase in the next 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really some important points that are all separate yet related. Thomas, do you have anything to add?
I suppose for me, M3 recruit, train and deploy graduate talent, and we put them on site with our clients, so tier one investment banks, software development companies. So all of that is absolutely true, what was said. But for us, computer science as a degree is a great leveler because we've got much higher statistics in terms of diversity stats for women and for BME communities who are coming in through our program and being successful as an alumni on site with our clients. So mainly because of our training, it's paid, mainly because our assessments are all online, our training is online, it opens up a massive community of applications that can come in through our talent team. So for us at M3, it's something always that we've really done, and it's never really been about what's in current trends, because the way we recruit and the way that our practices are geared up is focused on computer science and other technological degrees to make sure that everyone has got an opportunity based on merit.
Right, yeah, and just a few issues that come to mind weaving together both of your answers, and I'll definitely get to you, Liz, in a second. When we think of the gender wage gap, something that is sort of a little bit more understood in popular discourse, a little bit less sort of deeply seated within academic realms, as well as the dimension of that with respect to STEM skills and STEM-related jobs. Computer science is a very interesting example of that because we don't actually see linear progression in terms of the number of women, the number of ethnic minorities, and the number of people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are located in these positions over time. There were actually more women computer scientists graduating from university as well as in the professional level categories of computer science in the 1980s than there are now in the UK as well as in North America. So as I said, the linear progression is actually a myth. So organizations who are specifically focused on building more diverse pipelines in these areas, they will have benefits not only for women as individuals, as groups, but also for broader economic policy perspective. So, Liz, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Oh, there's so much in all of that. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning, I guess, from my perspective. TechNation is the growth platform to support scaling tech entrepreneurs across the UK. That means we are super keen to find scaling tech entrepreneurs and help them. That's it. That's all we have to do. It's quite an easy mission. We're trying to hack our way to a more mature ecosystem from a tech perspective right the way across the country. So we come at this from two angles. There's a question about what we do in our own scaling business. So when I signed my employment contract 2 years ago to join TechNation, I think we were 36 people. We're now about 116. So that journey's been quite rapid for us. So we are living and breathing the scaling journey, and we know how hard it is. We've got our own programs and processes and challenges and opportunities around diversity and inclusion. But also, because we look after this national network of entrepreneurs who are building incredible things, like Zara, and creating tons and tons of jobs, we've got a responsibility to help all of those entrepreneurs and their senior leadership teams at the same time. So we come at this from kind of two angles. I think when we have conversations about diversity and inclusion, diversity you can measure that, right? You can measure how diverse your organization is across a number of different variables, whether it's gender, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, the list goes on. You can measure that. Inclusion and inclusivity is for us about how you build a culture that allows all of those different kind of strata of people to thrive. Not just exist and kind of be pushing against the status quo and pushing against the norm, but actually thrive in the environment that you've built and are continuing to build. So we are in those two ways, us as a company and also the network of companies that we support, always looking to kind of push the envelope on. From a factual stats perspective, are we measuring enough? Are we measuring it right? Are we making progress? Is the dial going in the right direction? And then also, what do you and what can you and what should you do culturally to try and support those stats going in the right direction? but I've addressed none of the things that we've already talked about on the panel, so I'm just going to leave that there.
No, I feel like those insights are so important. And just before we came on camera, we were talking about sort of a key difference between many organizations, in my experience, which are successful and those which are not. And that indicator is whether they're capable, both in terms of capacity of employees as well as the buy-in from leadership in terms of the value of measuring progress, measuring what diversity and inclusion means, measuring not only in terms of wrapping the parameters around the concepts, but also time-specific measurements. So yeah, I feel like those points were highly relevant, and I think they're often left out of the conversation, especially in the public discourse. So yeah, just bridging off of what everyone has said so far, I think it would be remiss if we did not mention the effects of the pandemic in terms of understanding within business generally, within technology specifically, not only of the interconnected nature of the world, of organizations, of supply chains, of people, but also the disproportionate effect the pandemic has had on particular groups of people, including women, including ethnic minorities, people from LGBTQ+ communities, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'd be curious to hear, and I'm sure our audience is curious to hear as well, how your organization has sort of taken what's more prevalent in the media and in popular understanding and used that as a way to leverage the buy-in for diversity and inclusion. So Thomas, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, we were chatting about it earlier, and I said it in my first answer. We've always really done it. We've never not kind of, yeah, we've never trendsetters. We've never leveraged what was in the media, and I'm loath to say it has highlighted how important diversity and inclusion is in the workplace and allyship and all the positive things that I'm sure we've all been trying to do and working in for a number of years, but. I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of a cynic in that we've always been doing it, but it being highlighted in the news daily has helped me and mthree and Wiley being able to drive that conversation internally with leadership, as you said, and with managers, with training, making it front and center of what's important in a company and why is it important. And I'm also loath to always say, diverse and inclusive organizations are more successful. You've got to get the buy-in, you've got to get the win before people care. Whereas I approach it more from a lower socioeconomic background and from the LGBTQ+ community that, you can't just say it's commercially viable, so go do it. You've got to say other reasons why, and talking about measuring inclusivity, it's quite hard to get to drive that conversation sometimes.
Yeah, I think those are some really great points because in sort of the echo chambers that we can sometimes live in, the things we take for granted, and it's sort of positive as well as negative for everyone, the taken for granted assumptions we all have about what is just a matter of fact or something that is malleable are all quite different. In my echo chamber, sort of 20 years of good quality research from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, from the OECD, has shown us the business imperative for diversity and inclusion. So when we're hearing about organizations embracing this as a concept that's new, it is encouraging, but it's also, it's a little bit behind in some ways, and so you really have to, choose your words carefully, understand your audience, and sort of meet people where they are. I think that is really key to success. So yeah, Zara, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and how these issues are sort of front and center within your organization.
Yeah, so again, a very interesting question, and very much what we do at Gapsquare is supporting and helping businesses create diversity and inclusion within their organizations. And we've been running for about 5 years, catching kind of slow momentum, maybe occasionally legislation pushes from around the world, because government are introducing increasingly more legislation around pay equity and pay transparency. And then when COVID hit, a lot of our customers, in fact, most of our customers, started calling us and saying, we need to put this on hold. We need to put this on hold. So very quickly we realized that an assumption we've always had is actually very true. This is not a must-have for businesses. This is a nice-to-have. So they didn't think in the first instance that this is something that they need in order to survive through COVID, in order to engage with their workforce. This was a kind of a tick box exercise that was happening somewhere in the background that was one of the first things that could be cut when times got harder. And then as the Black Lives Matter movement was picking up momentum in the US, a lot of those customers started coming back in force and saying, actually, no, hold on, we want to take back the fact that we said that we don't need this. We very much need this. We also want to look at ethnicity and race. We also want to understand a lot of these issues around our workforce and how we create more diversity and how we're doing on recruitment and how we're doing on career progression and retention and career growth for diverse talent within the company. So that work has started to pick up again, but I think we're still not yet in that point of history where businesses understand that this is a must-have. You have pockets of good practice. So for instance, companies, large businesses like Unilever, where they've introduced metrics around diversity as a metrics that's discussed at every single board meeting. So they're changing the metrics that they bring into board meetings away from profit and away from turnover, more into ESGs, more into diversity and inclusion, more into fairness, fair pay, and how their employees are treated around the world, because a lot of these businesses realize that the 21st century is a place where business needs to be fair, that there's only space for one kind of tech in the future, I want to think, and that's tech for good. Anything that's not tech for good, what kind of tech is that? I mean, is that tech for bad? So the whole paradigm, I think COVID is helping reshift the paradigm about what's important and what's valuable to a business. And from my point of view, that's really exciting because it means a lot of more companies are going to start looking at diversity and inclusion. And a lot more companies are going to start thinking about how do we tackle this problem differently, because what we've been trying to do so far, and Kathleen has pointed out like the slow growth of women in STEM at the beginning of this panel, if we continue at that pace, we're not going to make progress, and we're also trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. What we need to do is rethink the workplace, rethink jobs, rethink tasks that make up certain jobs. Going back to the panel that was here previously, talking about AI and kind of the disjointedness between computer science and the deeper tech and the human aspect of it, that's a very important issue and actually is a key to solving diversity and inclusion within the future of tech. So there's a lot of interesting things that I think, as bad as COVID has been for health, for the economy, for our mental health, it's also made a push in the right direction for our economies, and it's quite an exciting time.
Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't agree more with you. I feel like the possibilities, the opportunities, and the optimism that has come out of the understanding, even at very basic levels, of how things need to change for people's everyday experience of work, but also economies more generally, is very exciting. And yeah, just sort of full of possibility. So, Liz, did you have any thoughts to add on?
I think just really firmly agreeing with Zara on this one, that there is definitely an opportunity. We've all lived through this moment when lots of things happened all at the same time. You know, we're all at home all of a sudden, fearing for our health and the health of our loved ones and livelihoods and the economy. It's only 18 months, and it's almost hard to remember how utterly terrifying that was in the beginning. And as a result, we were all a bit more human. You know, I've been at work in some form or another for 20 years now, and for the last 11 of those, I've had 2 children to try and juggle into the mix. I spent a long time trying to make sure that those worlds never collide. You know, the children are here and I'm here. I go to work and then I pick them up and then I do this thing, and trying to be like a swan and like make it all look like it was happening. We couldn't do that in COVID. They were barreling about in the background in their pajamas, you know, so everybody had to accept that there was chaos going on, and I might need to like turn my camera off for a second and be back in a minute. So to Zara's point about, you know, there is an opportunity. Can we not lose that moment of kind of human-to-human connection where we accept that lots of people have lots of other things going on and they can still add huge amounts of value and actually bring a different perspective that's valuable in its own way, so we need to kind of keep that human connection, and hopefully that drives some of the appetite for more diverse organisations and makes us realise the diversity that we've already got but perhaps weren't making the most of. So yeah, I don't want us to ping back. I want us to kind of build forward based on what we've shown is possible. You know, what's the excuse now for saying that people can't work from home? You know, yeah. There is no excuse. We've done it for 18 months and the world has carried on turning. So I hope that we can take this moment and make the most of it rather than slipping back into old ways.
Thank you for that. And actually, I really love the words you chose. Expanding the ideas about what is possible. I think that is relevant in all dimensions of business. And really, I think at the heart of what we're talking about here, language is central. You know, what are the concepts? What are the assumptions? How are we either creating limits or greater possibilities for people to participate, for people to envision themselves in different spaces? That's one thing that I'm so excited about, participating in London Tech Week generally, the Future of Work Summit specifically. We get to see diversity and inclusion in practice and sort of reimagining the possibilities for future generations to embody and really just embody spaces, embody identities that have not been so commonplace in the past. And that's necessary for more innovative thinking, for better problem solving, for really progress generally. So I think my next question sort of stems from that, building on the language aspect. Within the diversity and inclusion space, there are a lot of acronyms, as tend to be the case in all academic disciplines, in most business domains. So two that come to mind for me are LGBTQ+ and BAME. I would love to hear the panelists' thoughts on both the value and maybe like sort of the more problematic aspects of these terms. Should we see them as useful, as starting points for conversation, or are they sort of more than that? Thomas, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, great, thanks.
No pressure.
That's a hot potato, Tom.
Yeah.
Luckily, you have no.
Or maybe you could just give us some examples of, you know, in your own experience, like what has been the utility of these? What is the significance of them? Are they more problematic than useful?
In the context of the workplace and promoting diversity and inclusion, and the future of the workplace and the future of work, they have been incredibly useful. I mean, I remember when it was LGBT. I remember when it was GBT, and then they put L at the front. Yeah, for all the amazing lesbians that helped during the HIV crisis. And cared for all. Yeah, so they moved the L to the front in homage. So there's been so much. They're great as buckets or phrases, or when you're in work and you're trying to have those conversations. But they also do pigeonhole people, and I feel really part of the LGBTQ+ community. I mean, I grew up in Cardiff, went to a rough school, played rugby. I never really touched that, and then people might say, oh, but they're going to pigeonhole me as LGBTQ+, because that's what you are, so what's your opinion on this? Well, I might have a completely different opinion to someone else. So.
And that's such an important dimension to say, like, just because I'm a woman, just because I'm from a certain geography or economic background or sexual preference orientation, doesn't mean I represent the entire group. So it's like a conversation about sameness and difference.
Yeah.
We're similar in some ways, more likely to experience some things, but also individuals. It's complex.
Yeah, and I mean, we work with every metric going in every kind of area or acronym that you want to use. But you've just got to be genuine, and you've got to be really honest about why you're doing it. Why does having diverse and inclusive workplace improve a company's culture? What makes it better? Not results. What else? And driving that conversation forward rather than just having those statistics or those buckets. So that's my view, really.
No, thank you for that. Liz, would you like to follow up?
I think you're absolutely right. I think language is really important. And there has been some fierce debate about acronyms and their value or how problematic they are. I think the more important angle to that discussion is just recognizing that, and I think you mentioned it before, Kathy, you have to kind of meet people where they are. So we're not a huge organization. 100-ish people is not a huge organization. And yet when we stopped last summer to try and reckon with this moment when lots of people in the organization were genuinely traumatized by what was happening in the news, lots of other people had this kind of awakening that, oh God, I just didn't even know this was going on in the world, and feeling awful that they didn't know it was. So lots of people are dealing with lots of things all at the same time. It's kind of this melting pot of trauma at different levels. There is no point at that point trying to, well, don't use the acronym, that's terrible, we hate that, don't say that. Let's just have a conversation and let's meet people where they are. Let's understand people's understanding of the issues. And if you do hate an acronym, I'm not a fan of BAME, I'm not going to lie. I don't want to be all the others in one pot together. I think that's grim. However, if someone uses that term and they are trying to engage in a conversation and they are genuine, as Tom says, okay, well, let's have a conversation about it. Let's not kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I just think you have to be careful with language. You have to recognize that people are at different points in their journey in understanding all of this. I saw a great document that we, the D&I work that we have done internally at TechNation, and we have also, you should download it if you're interested, we have created a toolkit for scaling tech companies, very practical. In your different functions, these are the things that you can do to move your organization forward. You can find it on our website. But the organization that we use to help us with that is a consultancy called The Unmistakable. And they produced a report called Diversity and Confusion. And the whole thing is how difficult it is for people to understand what to say. Should they mention if they don't understand a particular issue? If they've got questions about neurodiversity, is it okay to ask the person in their team that they know has a neurodiverse condition? Who should, the fear associated with it, I think, is stopping us moving forward, and it's paralyzing. And for me, that is far more of a problem than someone using an acronym that I wouldn't use myself but doesn't offend me.
Yeah.
No, I think those are great points, and both of what Thomas and Liz just shared sort of, I think, highlights the importance of having different levels of analysis and different types of solutions for different problems. So when we're having a conversation with an individual person, so many of these nuanced points, especially that Thomas mentioned, are so key. And also what Liz mentioned, meet the person where they are, give them the benefit of the doubt, lead with empathy. But then at the organizational level, and in terms of defining culture, we need to go beyond that nuanced understanding in some respect and say, these are the key principles and values that we're going to lead with. And that at the societal level, which I sort of tend to see things in these three levels, it's even more complex, more broad, but drawing those three levels together, I think, is a key piece of helping people to understand the significance of diversity and inclusion, not just as individuals, but for their specific strategic business objectives and creating measurable results. And so in terms of the acronyms, Zara, I'd love to hear sort of the significance of them for your organization and how you tackle these complicated issues as well.
Well, I fully agree with Liz and Tom, and I think there's kind of, just to highlight two little dangers with both using or dismissing them. And the danger with using is to not slip into the kind of hierarchies of who deserves more than others. I've been in many meetings where it was about, well, women have already had this, so it's time we do this for this other group. And it's, no, we're not creating hierarchies of need or hierarchies of discrimination. We need to look at this holistically, because actually they're all interrelated issues. And on the other side, I think I'm sometimes wary of the term diversity of thought creeping in and replacing all of the other kind of groups, because then ultimately we can end up back into a place where white, middle-aged, middle-class Californians can still claim they have diversity of thought. So it's kind of the different sides of this. I think we need to keep in mind as we think about the acronyms and how we use them.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. Okay, so we are receiving indication that Q&A from the audience is about to roll out. So, if anybody would like to ask our panelists something, I'm sure they would love to. Should we? Yeah.
Very quick hand.
We,
She was straight up.
yeah. Would you like to ask someone specific or the panel generally?
Go to just one panelist.
Okay. Well, however you'd like this to roll out, the floor is yours.
So I wanted to go back to the creating and measuring inclusivity, but specifically I'm thinking about the virtual workplace. Recent research seems to indicate that people of color specifically are actually pushing back on returning into the office because they're trying to limit uncomfortable conversations, microaggressions in the office, so on and so forth. And so obviously I'm thinking about areas where people are privileged enough to work from home, but I would love to hear from you about any advice to employers on how then do you create and measure an inclusive workplace when you're working virtually or you're creating a virtual workplace.
Thank you for that.
That's an amazing question. Can I just jump in there? Because I feel like I have so many thoughts about this. We're not going to talk about all of them because we'd be here for a long time. If you have got a group of employees, whether that's all of them or some of them, and they don't want to come back to your office, okay, you need to pause for a second and figure out why. Right. So is it that there's something broken in the culture that was making them feel uncomfortable, and therefore that is something that you can probably address? Or is it just that we've got used to a new paradigm and they can balance their lives better and their quality of life is better? And also, why are you trying to drag them back to the office anyway, right? We're here to talk about the future of work. I don't think it's based in the office. So I think you need to unwrap that in the situations where it rears its head, because I think sometimes it will be showing you a very specific problem for one or more communities within your business, and that needs addressing. But also, it might just be that you're trying to drag them back as if it's the year 2000. Like, this is not where we're going. If you value your talent and they're working and you trust them to get it done, controversial, don't drag them back to an office.
It's not controversial, is it? Define your work.
With some people, it's really controversial.
Define your workspace and workplace. What is it for? Is it for collaboration? Is it for innovation? Yeah. Is it for meetings? Like, there is no value in sitting there for 8 hours a day doing emails. So
yeah.
If you don't define what your future strategy and workplace and workspace is, why would I want to come back?
Yeah.
Why inspire me to come back?
And also in tech, and I think we've talked about this today, I wasn't here for the whole of the day, we've talked about this massive skills shortage. It is, so the founders in my network, it is their number one concern, how can I get the right number of people with the right skills quickly enough? You know, I've raised investment, now I need to fill all these jobs. Don't force them to come into an office if that's not what they want to do. Like, this is going to define, you know, we talk about the great resignation. This is going to define the next few years. People are going to vote with their feet. You force them to come back to an office that culturally feels uncomfortable and that they can't do their best work. They'll just work for someone else remotely instead of you. So, yeah, this is not the moment.
And I think just going back to sort of the origins of your question, what comes to mind for me is we're actually talking about some of the most, they seem like the most simple issues, questions of language and concept, but then measuring them, you know, understanding what does progress mean is actually very specific to an organization. So we can understand what's working well with other organizations and apply those, create more efficiencies within the organization by, you know, not reinventing the wheel in all respects. But I think unless leaders and teams at all levels of the organization are able to sit down and really, like Thomas said, wrap parameters around what is the purpose of our organization? Why do we come here every day? What is the mission? And tying that mission and purpose to what individual people are doing. And it's actually quite difficult to articulate some of these things. It's difficult to articulate what is gender. What does that mean to most people? What is the difference between biology and gender identity? These things are not, most people don't have the language to really articulate things that we take for granted in these ways. So to have experts within the organization who can sort of sift through these things and define them in measurable ways is key. So I think, yeah, did you have anything to add, Zara, on that in terms of like measuring?
I think, oh, little disco. I think only one thing that I wanted to throw into the mix for us to think about, and that's globally, 70% of the workforce has not been able to work from home at all, and that's a significant chunk of the workforce population. And sometimes they work for the same organization where some of the team members have been able to work from home. So it's a huge balancing act, and I agree with Liz that with the next few years are going to be telling in terms of the survival of organizations that actually do right by their people. And I'd like to come back to the thing that I was saying at the beginning. We're in the 21st century. Only organizations that do right by their people should continue to exist, and we should only continue to purchase from those organizations, engage services from those organizations, and overall help them be successful because they care about the people who work for them.
Great point, thank you. I think we have another question in the audience. The man in the blue suit.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, one question is about data, and I will ask the panel current states and future state. A lot of the things that are actually, whenever we talk about anything to do with diversity, you actually do some sort of data to create some either plan, action, whatever. Of course, the difficulty is a lot of this data is extremely sensitive. So we can have actually a number of challenges. Some people might not feel that okay to actually give the data, especially maybe to your company. But what happens if it's a government or so? My question is, at the moment, what is your experience of people really sharing the data? What is the quality? Can you also see people trying to take advantage? If I am an employee, which I'm not very good, but I know there is a program that maybe, and I know this in some cases, I might actually say I'm black because I know this segment is going to be favored in any way. Have you experienced anything of that? And then going forward, this is the current thing. How do you see ideally moving forward in the future? What should be the ideal for the, how do we improve, not just the individual, but also the companies, probably the other way around, but how do we improve the data collections, sort of also regulations, which at the moment, some regulators are contradictory. They tell you don't discriminate, but then at the same time, they tell you don't even get the data. So if I cannot ask you what religion, what do you want me, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to quickly wrap some parameters around that question, that series of questions where there's a lot to unpack there. My initial thought is people who are sort of misrepresenting themselves for alleged benefits. I think that's part of a larger mythology. It's not a real social problem. It makes me think about when people say, well, if people start reporting sexual assault, then there's going to be people who make stories up like this just to get attention. Most people don't want that type of attention. That really is part of a larger narrative of mythology. So I think we'll sort of stay away from that aspect of the question, but I think the issue of producing and analyzing good quality data within organizations is key, not only for getting leadership buy-in, but also for understanding trends over time. So Liz, would you like to sort of share some thoughts on that?
I think this probably ties into some of the things that we've already talked about. So much of what people are trying to do from a diversity and inclusiveness perspective, all roads lead back to culture, right? So in terms of even beginning that exercise, we have recognized we want to do more as an organization. Let's measure where we are. Okay, so that's a whole project. And there has to be a level of trust between the company and its employees to make that feasible. They need to trust what you're going to do with that information. They need to be bought into the fact that you want to get from A to B from a D&I perspective. So before you can even send out your questionnaire, you've got months of work to do to make sure that they understand the journey, they are broadly on board, they feel supported, they feel enabled, they trust you as an organization to do the right thing. So I think as much as it's important to have that starting point where you measure, you've started months ago before you get there. And there are some great resources out there in terms of how you go about it, what that process looks like, what that project looks like, etc. But it all comes back to culture. They need to trust that you are doing the right thing, and your intention is genuine, as Tom said.
Just one-liner to give a really HR answer. You'd obviously get that data at onboarding, and we've got 10 entities in 11 different countries, so you have to fit with the legal framework of that country, but it gives you a starting point, but it only gives you the start. There's loads of cool things around AI and different ATSs that can anonymize that data for HR teams, and then you can use it to get your seat at the table and drive the conversation forward. But yeah, I would stay away from the kind of the ones and twos that might be using their data to further an agenda. Just like, again, HR answer, you have disciplinary and grievance stuff going on, you have naughty people in organisations, so I wouldn't let that enter the debate.
Thank you. Zara, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I
Dan?
think Liz really said a key word here, and that's trust. And we've seen many organizations in the UK, for instance, where it's not mandatory to ask for ethnicity data from employees, but as soon as the company went on this journey of explaining why and highlighting how that data is going to be utilized and what it's going to help them measure and track, the disclosure rates have gone significantly up because people were bought into it. The key is then also following up with that plan and not letting that trust down. So if you, as an organization, say that you want to do this based on this data, then make sure that you do that.
Thank you. So we're looking at the clock. It's time to wrap up. So I would like to say a big thank you to Zara, Liz, and Thomas for sharing your insights and expertise. I feel like I learned a lot. I hope the audience did as well. So yeah, thank you, everyone.